In this Academy tutorial video, we're going to demonstrate how to set a file up for using Duplo. Now, this has come from a customer request who said, can the Visualis3R software simulate the different depth structure of the Duplo Dusense? So if you're not familiar with the Duplo system, it is a raised varnish polymer based system whereby if you set 100% on your artwork file, you get this really nice raised glossy beveled effect. But then you can also set your artwork to a tint percentage of that spot colour. And by setting it to a tint percentage, you get a slightly less height to it. So you can control the height and the kind of the glossy reflection to it by using tints. So do check out the Duplo tint chart that will tell you what settings to use, but we're just going to basically reproduce this ourselves. So let's get rid of that. We don't need that anymore. Let's make our own design. So we're going to start out with a document and we're going to add a color background to it. So I've just given it like a grayish tint to that. And it's just 4 color. We're going to need 3 spot colors for this demonstration. We're going to use, first of all, one called Duplo. Okay, now you can give it any color you want. Duplo normally recommends coloring it black because they want a black separation when it's output. I'm going to give it green so I can see it on the screen. Black on top of black wouldn't be really very logical. So we call it Duplo, we call it a spot color, and we set the color because a clear varnish is clear. So we have to give it a color so we can see it. Next, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to create a bronze foil. Bronze foil. So spell it as bronze foil. Create spot color. Put in whatever values you want. You know, I don't know, whatever. Let's round this out just to make it look nice. Bronze foil. Doesn't make any difference what the color is. It's the naming. And we're also going to do a spot white. So in this case, white set to spot color and add it all in. Now, if you already had white in your document, then you wouldn't be able to create a spot color called white. So if you wanted to, you could call it spot white. Okay, just to show you that you can have the name. Provided it's got white in it, it'll be picked up. Okay, so next we need to create our design and we're going to create that circuit board effect. So here's one I prepared earlier. So this is a stock library file. I downloaded it from freepik.com. They have some great content. Now, just to explain what we've got here. So on this varnish layer, we have, as you can see, different tints. So what do we have? Well, the V3R logo itself and the circles and some of the circuitry is done at 100% of Duplo. So for the demonstration purposes in this video, we're going to be working with the appearance box, the attributes, the color. Okay, so Duplo, color, 100%. And then we're going to set the attributes to overprint fill. Okay, we don't use multiply. I'll explain that in a moment why. Best way of working is using overprint. It's much, much safer. Okay, so do that for all of these green elements. Set them to overprint. For the lighter green, that is 30% that I'm using in this design. So 30% of Duplo set to overprint. That's all there is to it. So at the moment, we have overprint preview switched off. So it allows me to be able to see that green varnish separation pretty clearly. Now, if I switch on my overprint preview, we're now going to get that. So it's not as easy to see. So first of all, if you're using multiply, this is what you will always see because you cannot switch off multiply. There's no switch off multiply in the preview. So overprint preview allows you to be able to switch on and off and see your design better. So that's the first tip. Now we will show you another instance as to why overprint rules over the top of multiply, but it'll come in a little bit later on. So what we're going to do now is we're going to add 2 bits of text. So at the top here we have digital foiling and 3D sculpted varnish. And at the bottom we have Visualis3R or visualizer and render the extraordinary. So this is in white, so we create the text, we color up spot white, we set it to overprint, exactly the same. Now you might be thinking, okay, well, white overprinting the varnish, that's not going to be a good look, so all that varnish is going to come through the text. And that's where we're going to create some framing. So framing back away from the text, and I'll demonstrate that in a moment. So for now, just bear with me. Create your white, set it to overprint fill. Same thing for the foil. You overprint it because you don't want to knock out the design, because otherwise you're going to try and register a foil to a knocked out design. Not very clever. So overprint on top of the design. So what we need to do now is the framing back. So what we're going to do, let me just see if I've got anything on there. I don't think I do. So I'm going to take that, and let me just duplicate it and bring that down onto this layer. So I'm just going to hide my original spot foil and bronze, sorry, my spot white and bronze layer. So what I want on these two elements, on this frame back, I'm just going to create outlines. So I'm going to go Object, I'm going to go to Fonts, Create Outlines. So they're no longer fonts, they're now a fill. And then going to go to Object, Path, Offset Path, and I'm going to offset it by 0.07 inch in this instance. So you can see down here we're going just a slight outside of that kind of framing. So it's just pushing out the text area. Click on OK. Now I can, if I want to, I could just basically make all of them just a united shape, make it nice and easy. So that was using Pathfinder, by the way. Okay, so now that we have that done, we're going to call it up Duplo, but this time, ooh, what's going on there? Get rid of that. Something isn't grabbing it. Let me try that one again. Maybe I missed it. There we go, got it. Okay, so what we're doing here, we've got that varnish area on the Duplo, and we're going to set it this time to 0. Now this is why we don't use multiply. So if I was to use multiply instead, so let's go to this appearance layer, and let's just change that to multiply. Well, it doesn't really do anything because it's multiplying on top of the effects that are already there. So if you've already got varnish there, it's basically saying, well, add it or multiply it to that varnish. So you still have that pattern showing. We don't want that. So what we want to do, we're going to go and we're going to use the overprint option. So from your attributes, click on overprint. So at the moment it looks white, but when we turn on overprint preview, you'll now see, if we zoom in, our varnish has been removed because we've put 0. So basically the overprint works correctly. Using multiply won't. So that's a great tip for you as to why you should really be using overprint rather than multiply. And you get a lot of people telling you to use multiply, but safest method, use overprint. So there we have that, we have the foil and we have our Visualis3R. And at the moment looks a bit random and a little bit weird, and this is the whole point of Visualis3R. How can you see the effect unless you send it off to print? How do you know what it's going to look like? Well, this is where we're going to create a file. So let's make that save as. Let's go Richard's test. Okay, so I'm going to save a PDF file. So PDF export, for example. So with that done, what we're going to do now is we're going to jump over into the Visualis3R software because we want to see what it looks like. That's where all the magic happens. So let's go in here. Let's select PDF file. And we're going to select that file that we just made and click on open. So there is a rip in the background. It's ripping the file. Obviously, the more complex the file, the bigger the file. Like all these different tiny little elements on vector, it all adds a little bit of fractional time to the rendering. So what we're going to do is, whilst that opens up and renders the file, we're going to make the window a bit bigger. And there we have our file. So first of all, we have something that's been created in that design for us. So we have a grey background, we have a foil, we have our Visualis software. So we do need to make sure that what went on with that white? Where's the white? And the white to the top. There we go. So the white was down on the bottom layer. So I have to bring it to the top layer. So you can, first of all, you can move your layers around. I've just brought that on top here. Now the reason I did it with a spot white is because what I wanted to show is that we could, if we wanted to, remove just a black gradient in the background. We could add in here a black paper. So in this instance, let's say we're going to print it on an uncoated stock. So maybe we want to switch over to uncoated. Maybe, because in here we can change ink absorption and everything else, but at the moment we're just controlling the reflectivity. So maybe my substrate's not quite that black. Whoops. Maybe it's somewhere around here. Okay, so we can play around and get our substrate right. So that's fine, let's do that. So that white ink now makes sense. Because if we switch everything off, that's your paper. Now you print the white, but then we also want the foil and we also want our Duplo. So on our Duplo layer, we're going to come back to that in a moment. First of all, let's just work on this bronze foil. So the bronze foil, we could, if we want to, set it up for 3D raised foil. Really easy. We could just bang that on. We've now got a 3D sculptured raised foil in there. We could also do it as a hot foil stamp. So we can just switch that as a hot foil stamp. And what that does is it just puts a little bit of sculptured indentation around the outside edge. You'll be able to see if we switch it on and off. You can see that being stamped kind of effect. Okay, so that's basically what hot foil stamping does. So next, let's take a look at that Duplo separation. So the great thing about Visualis3R is it allows you to be able to control all the different types of effects for every effect. So in this instance with Duplo, you might decide that actually that you want it more beveled. So depending on what the depth and this of your varnish is, you can set that. So I'm going to say, well, actually my 3D bevel looks more like, I don't know, let's go with 110. And that's my 3D raised glossy effect. Now I might decide that actually it's not quite that shiny, not quite as glossy, not quite as reflective. And I can set all of that up however I want to work. So I can match a standard. So I can output something off my press. So for example, you can get something from a print service provider, or it might be for your own press, and you can see the sample. You can then match it visually using the sliders, and once you've done so, you can then basically save it as a preset. So let's just play around with this. Let's just add a little bit of highlight to the edge. Maybe let's just have a little zoom in on these areas on the side. So what I'm trying to show you here, if you notice, we've got two different depths of the varnish. Now if I change the actual varnish depth, you'll see that we're getting slight raised up effect here on this thinner area. So this was the tint. We've still got doming, and by changing the bevel, we can also change the structure. So basically we can match a whole range of different effects. So for me personally, I would say, okay, it's probably going to be like that, maybe somewhere around here, and that will be my Duplo effect. So I can save that as, let's just go test Duplo. So I've done that. Now if I was messing around and I was like, okay, let's see what this looks like, and I'm playing around with this and that and got all these things mixed up, and I was like, oh my god, what have I done? If you basically, you can basically do a factory reset. You can also, let me just put my settings back in that I saved from earlier. You can also save as a default. So if every single time I'm using this software, I know what my settings are. I don't want to be going to a presets folder. You can save as default, which means that now every time I open the software, it's always going to load up with my settings. So again, let's just play with this one. So I'll just reset one of them so you can see what happens. If I reset to default now, it resets back to my settings that I saved. So it becomes your software. You're tailoring it to work the way you want to. Now you can, like I said, you can go in here and you can basically create presets. So if you are a printer or somebody that's basically got this equipment, you can create and set up your Duplo effect, and then you can export it. You can give it to your customer. So you can give it a name, and I would always recommend give it a unique name. Put your printer name in there. I don't know, ABC printer, whatever you're going to be called. And then at least that way, if you are giving your details across to people, it carries your branding so people know what to pick out from the presets. So what I can do, let me just give you an example. Let me just delete that. Let me do a factory reset. So it's come in like this by default. I can then import that preset from my desktop. So there's that ABC printer. That will then load it, and I've now got my settings for that printer. So you can share your settings. It's a very powerful system, and as you can see here, we have the different levels of gloss reflectivity and beveled effect. So clearly you can see here different 3D raised effects, beautifully executed, really simple to use. So once you've set your system up the way you want it to work, you don't have to worry about configuring all this. It will be pre-built in. But maybe you have a different type of effect. Maybe the paper's slightly different. Maybe you're printing this onto a kind of like a red kind of coated type paper, and maybe that the gloss reflection on the red works differently because of the light absorption. So when you're working with substrate, light is bouncing back from materials, but also from the reflection of the varnish. So you might find that it's actually not quite that glossy. You might find that's better, in which case you could then say, you know, Duplo, oops, get it right, on red stock. And then that way you can then save all these different effects. So the next time you come in, if you're working on the red stock, you can basically list up from down here. You can save a preset for this base material, and then you can assign it to your own settings. So it becomes an extremely easy and elegant system to be able to add any type of effect, any colored foil. Now that foil at the top, we have that. Let's just go and put this back to like a black because it will look better with that bronze. Maybe that bronze color's not quite that bronze. Maybe you want to change that as well. Well, in here we have the ability to change the color of the bronze. Maybe it's slightly more pinkish, so maybe bring it over. I don't know, let's see where we have it. We could have any color we want. We could maybe try and go for like a rosish gold. So we can basically play around and fine-tune the color and the effect. Is it purple? Is it pink? Whatever you like. So it allows you to be able to play around. So even though you call it bronze foil, you can go in here and have a play and say, well, what would it look like as red? Maybe I prefer it in gold. So a great way to be able to quickly and easily visualize different effects. We also have rainbow foil in there. If you don't know about the rainbow foil, do check that one out. And there's some pretty cool stuff that you can do with this one. So now we've got a rainbow holographic, hot foil stamped, Duplo raised beveled varnish with 2 different texture levels. So very easily we can then see what those effects are going to be like. So there we go. That is how we create the file, and that's how we visualize it using the Visualis3R software. If you have any questions, please do reach out to us at hello@v3r.studio.